Congratulations.
I think it depends on how far in advance they tell you though, right? Like,
Yeah, I think they told me.
Some
well, they told
don't
me the
even
time.
tell you.
I got
Some
the-
don't even tell
yeah.
you. It's like,
Your license day, what are we?
Johns Hopkins and WashU come back tomorrow.
All
Thanks.
right.
Awesome.
Wow. Oh, God. Boy. We get started. I'm sorry we're a little bit late because our policy meeting ran a little bit over. I'd like to call the Madison Public Schools Board of Education meeting to order. Please rise for the Pledge of Allegiance. Pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all. Thank you. Hey, first up on the agenda is the school community session and public participation. Emily, would you care to?
Good evening. We welcome public comment at our meetings, whether in person or online. We ask that you identify yourself by name and your address. We limit comments to 3 minutes. It should not be expected during public comment that the board or administration will respond. If necessary, you'll be contacted for follow-up. Do we have any members of the public online? No. Do we have anyone in public who'd like to speak at this time? No. Okay, thank you.
Thank you. Okay, moving on to the Board of Ed Student Representatives report with from Eli Ackerman and Brooke Anderson. Thank you.
Yeah, so spring sports have officially started, which means track for me and Brooke. And that started on Saturday. We had our first official practice this Monday. We're finalizing the end of the year dates for a lot of senior events. So the senior class trip, graduation's already been planned, the capping down ceremony, all of that stuff. And March 21st at the high school, we're celebrating Down Syndrome Awareness Day. So students are invited to wear bright and colorful socks to raise awareness for Down syndrome.
The SAT and NGSS, which is the Next Generation Science Standards testing, will be taking place tomorrow and next Wednesday for juniors. This is the first time that they're going to combine the test dates. So half of the juniors will be taking the SAT tomorrow, while the other half will be taking the NGSS test. And that means that the rest of the school gets a 3-hour delay, which I'm quite jealous of. And then March 27th, the Vibe show choir group has the end of the year fundraiser and will be selling tickets for $10. This is the last performance of the year, and the concert will also showcase the Polson chorus and the Vibe student solos.
I just want to add a clarification to that last point because the poster that went out today did not include the location.
Yeah.
So it will be at the Daniel Hand High School cafeteria, auditorium, cafeteria, whatever it is, whatever we call it. And good luck on the SATs.
Thank you.
And good luck in sports. Anybody have any questions for the students? Okay, thank you very much. You're welcome.
Thank you, Eli and Brett. I wanted to share one of the items that I had was on sports. We had 400 athletes coming out for the spring team. So that's amazing when you figure in high school 750 students. And the majority of our students are participating in a spring sport. So it's great. It's great. Keep our students busy. So March, as I shared last meeting, is Board Member Appreciation Month. We are happy to share a small token of the district's appreciation with our board members. Board members spend countless hours each year preparing for meetings, attending board meetings, committee meetings, reading district communications, listening to the public, advocating locally and at the state level for Madison Public Schools. Thank you for all your efforts and support. We know you sacrifice family and personal time to do this important work. We could not run the district without you. So thank you so much. We cannot pay you what you're worth, as you know, but we do like to recognize your service with what we can from time to time. So thank you.
Thank you very much. Should we move into the or
Thank
we
you.
wait till after?
Open it before the policy passes. So and just the last general announcement I had was Neck River School construction has started. If you drive by the site, you'll see some activity. They're putting fencing around the site and moving dirt around and getting some stuff done. They've moved the mailboxes from that side of the street to the other side of the street. So we have some real signs of the start of construction. So it's really exciting. And then just scheduled today is the groundbreaking. So board members will receive an invite tomorrow for the groundbreaking, which will be April 3rd at 9:30. We're trying to get you there, 9:45.
9:45 will be the official start,
Okay.
and you will all be asked to carpool, please.
Yes. I think we have a limit of about 20 cars to the site, so we will look to carpool and or potentially get a school bus to drive us over. This will be on a smaller ceremony schedule, scale based on the limited parking in this and what we can do at that point. We are looking at ways to involve students later, such as one of the things that they do in construction oftentimes is have students sign the last steel beam that goes up. And so we'd look to do that and involve more of the public when the site is easier to walk on and be on and keep everybody safe as we can. Okay.
So yeah, I just wanted to add to that, very excited to receive a text from Becky Frost tonight that Google Maps now lists the school as a site, so it's official, it's on Google Maps.
Is it saying Neck River?
Yeah, it does, yeah, yeah.
Screenshot it.
Isn't that cool? I know, she was thrilled.
Must
She's
be
like,
real. Yeah. It must be.
It must says it so, yes, it says Neck River School.
We rate.
So somebody's looking to move to town, they're gonna go on that and they go to Google Earth and see a lot of
Yeah.
what happened there, yeah.
And that was the superintendent's report, other than we also have.
One last piece, yes. So we're pleased and we appreciate Scott and Catherine's flexibility. We have been trying to get them on the agenda for a while. We've had budget and other things come up. But every 2 years in our great partnership with Madison Youth and Family Services, we start off meeting, Mr. Salvatore and I meet with Catherine Barton and Scott Cochran to plan this survey, and then they really take it from there. We appreciate all their work. They do a phenomenal job of getting the word out to students, and we get incredible participation here in Madison. And then this really, in a lot of ways, directs their work and their grant work, for the next 2 years in terms of addressing concerns and looking at positives and community assets. So without further ado, I'll turn it over to Scott and Catherine again. Thank you for being here. Some board members may have seen this before. We recognize that. And so you probably see a little shorter version than you might have seen elsewhere, and then have an opportunity for questions.
Both being really helpful to
Thank you. And thank you both for coming in. That's
Our pleasure. Good evening, everybody. As Dr. Cook said, my name is Scott Cochran. I'm the Director of Madison for Family Services. To my left is our Assistant Director for Community Support under Youth and Family Services. And Catherine, under her position, she oversees all of our drug and alcohol coalition work, as well as oversees the social service function of our office. So there's a number of things that she does that are involved with directly to the community. So I will walk you through or at least begin to walk through our data presentation. So I'm just going to move us ahead. Yes. So, all right. So this is so let me just start with Youth and Family Services. We are the official youth service bureau for the town of Madison. So we're defined under Connecticut state statute as the Youth Service Bureau, and that's just important to understand. So statutorily, we are required to essentially evaluate the needs as they relate to youth and families within the town. It's every YSB that falls under the statute. There's 102 such YSBs in the state of Connecticut that are part of the Connecticut Youth Services Association. Now, youth service bureaus are not necessarily responsible to address or solve all the problems or the issues that come up in their evaluations. They are responsible to know what they are and then to be providing programs and services to address those needs and working with community stakeholders, collaborating around what those needs are. And youth service bureaus can be of various sizes across the state. They really are based on how their community views them, how their community funds them and supports them to do their work. For our youth and family services, we provide a piece of positive youth development prevention. So we have a number of staff that are very specific to those duties. We have an outpatient mental health clinic, which provides services to youth and families in town. And as I mentioned before, we have a social services component that goes for all of adults in town. And our drug and alcohol coalition. So we, within our about 12 FTE departments, we cover a lot of ground. Our prevention programs that are very much integrated in, with the school system. We have programming now that reaches pretty much every student that's enrolled in the public school system. So mindfulness that goes on at the elementary level, as well as various peer programs, peer support programs, advocacy programs that operate all the way through middle school and high school. It's important for you all to know, and we recently did a presentation in front of the Dana faculty, and we did get some feedback afterwards around newer staff that weren't as familiar with us. So it's important for us to kind of always remind people who and what we are, and if there's any public who watch this, I want to make sure that they understand who and what we are. Okay. So the survey, as Dr. Cook mentioned, goes back over the summer. We start talking and putting together input towards what our survey will look like in the fall. We start with our base survey, which is the 160 question Search Institute. That's the one that we've done consistently over time. That gives us really good data points to compare. And that particular survey also utilizes the developmental asset model. So not only are we asking questions about where there might be issues or concerns like substance abuse and mental health issues, but we're also asking for and measuring for the presence of developmental assets. So it's not just looking at where our problems are, it's also looking at where our strengths are and getting the youth to really weigh in, or at least our high school youth to really weigh in on what they see is going on. Because 160 questions is not enough, we add an addendum of about 19 questions. Those questions are ones that we feel, believe it or not, are missed. And Catherine will explain a little bit more, like we have some mental health questions that are not as well covered in the Search Institute that we want to explore a little more deeply in the survey itself. Any questions that I get? Yeah. Right. Oh, I love this slide. So one of the biggest challenges we have with high school students is their willingness to engage in such a long survey. But when we moved it to an electronic survey, there were also concerns about the safety of their interaction with the survey. So they essentially told us over the first couple of times that we did this electronically that they were worried about having their surveys traced back directly to them. So I won't play the video. Our way of handling this was to, rather than to expect like teachers in the advisory classes when they took the survey to read a statement or expect them to describe the survey in any kind of detail. We didn't think that that was fair or realistic. So we created a video in which we explain what the survey is, explain how we keep their data safe, really emphasize the point that we don't really want to know, we have no desire to actually even consider looking, and that it is essentially a theoretical impossibility for us to trace back any survey to them. So I have a piece that's about a 4-minute preview video. I have a section, Catherine has a section, And we have two great student reps on to our board, so we have two students who join us. And each of us basically explain what the survey is, why it's important, and how we keep their data safe. And this is the best that we can do to help them feel better about it.
Hello to all.
And that's enough. Okay. Favorite part of the survey is after the survey. It's really the rollout, it's the conversations that come in different forums and in different meetings. We've done presentations now. How many altogether was it?
9.
9 presentations. One large one to the community that included a student panel. One that we did with the student leadership class at the high school. And wherever we can, we're sharing the data. We want to get people's reactions to it. You know, it's not just about what the number is, it's what the number means to people and what we're learning means to people. And we take this information, it does absolutely affect how we think about our programming, what we plan for. But this year, which has really been cool, it's made its way into advisory lessons. And we've worked with 2 of the teachers in the administration at the high school to help move some of the data points into smaller group discussions at the high school. As you can imagine, if we tried to do this kind of a presentation and showed just the survey results, it's really not a very effective way to engage high school students, especially on stuff like it's just data. And there's some things when we've talked to certain high school students where, like, if we're expressing, you know, which class maybe represents a number in terms of substance abuse, sometimes they have a way of taking that, not the way that we would like it to, like they would share. So rather than that, we, and really this has gone back to the high school, they're taking the data and moving it towards more intimate discussions among students, which we really appreciate and value. And you ready?
Ready.
Oh.
So for at a glance, basically our substance use for the most part stayed about the same. Vaping and prescription drugs only went up about 1 percentage point. Cannabis stayed the same as it was 2 years ago. The one big thing that we saw an increase in was drinking. So the alcohol use went from 25% to 31%. Now, I will say in 2021, we hit an all-time low on all substances because we were still kind of pandemicking at that point. So something that we saw at the national level, at the state level, everybody's rates plummeted because people were less social, they weren't going out as much. So we weren't surprised to see an increase, but I think the biggest surprise for us was alcohol was the big increase and everything else stayed low. But I'm going to get into a little bit more detail about one of those interesting factors in a minute. The developmental assets went down slightly from 2021. It kind of reinforces the fact that substance use went up slightly, but that now the assets went down slightly. We'll get into more detail about what those assets are and what that looks like. There has been improvement in youth mental health. That includes depression, anxiety, and suicide attempts. And we've also seen an improvement in the number of students who responded that they've been victims of sexual assault and sexual harassment, which we're really happy about. We started asking about that 2 years ago because it was something that kind of popped up on our radar. We're like, we would love to have more data about that. And I can't tell you how lucky we are that Madison Public Schools were like, yeah, go for it. The fact that Dr. Cook and Mr. Salutary were like, yeah, we could ask those questions was amazing. Considering some towns are still pushing back on doing surveys in general. And I think the biggest message that we take from the survey is the majority of our kids are making really good, healthy decisions. When you look at the trends and when you look at the things that jump out as alarming, they are, but at the end of the day, a majority of our students are making really good, smart, healthy decisions. And that's something that we have to continue to remind ourselves. So one of the biggest things that popped out, especially around the drinking this year, was this is the first time that we've been doing the survey that we've seen the sophomore class outuse the juniors for alcohol and tobacco. And they were completely even for cannabis. Typically what we see is freshmen are the lowest, then sophomore year goes up a little bit, and then there's kind of a big jump between sophomore and junior year, and then there's another increase for senior year. But this was the first time ever that we've seen the sophomore class out using the juniors, which was a surprise. Also something to be concerned about because they're only sophomores and we have them for 2 more years. So definitely something we want to continue to work with the schools to address with that population. And one of the big questions, I don't know if you guys had this question, but my first question was, are juniors drinking less or are sophomores drinking more? And the answer was yes. So our junior classes continue to go down over time. You'll see pretty much everybody hit their all-time low 2 years ago during the pandemic, except for the junior class, they continued to go down. But that sophomore class shot up drastically. So 2 years ago, 10th graders, only 16% of 10th graders were drinking in the last 30 days. That went up to 36% this year. So it's definitely a concern. It's something to look at. Something to keep our eye on, something to continue to educate those students. And the other interesting thing is if you look at this graph, that bottom line, the freshmen in 2021, that 10%, those are now our 27% of juniors that responded that they were drinking in the last 30 days. So it's interesting, an all-time low for freshmen. 2 years later was an all-time low for juniors. That 16% of sophomores, though, are now that 45% of seniors. So it's just interesting to see how those 2 grades kind of moved forward in the last 2 years. This was the first year that we decided to ask for how students that were using cannabis in the last 30 days ingested cannabis, because we know that there's now this huge push to go towards vaping and edibles. And we're seeing less and less of the dried plant. So we allowed our students to select however many they were using. 79% of our students who responded that they had used cannabis in the last 30 days vaped it. So that wasn't a surprise, but it's a challenge because we know it's easier to hide, easier to conceal, easier to take with you. 46% were using edibles, 57% smoking. My guess is in time, edibles and smoking are going to shift and we're going to see more and more edibles because especially on social media apps and things that are being pushed towards underage consumers, we know that it's the edible and the vaping market. So why is it a concern about vaping? For the cannabis concentrates, they're definitely a more potent form of taking in THC, which is that part of marijuana that makes you high. So when you think about the dried plants, even the top tier dried plants at this point are around 20%, which is, if you think back to 1999, which I know is 25 years ago, but does it feel like 25 years ago? Not really. That was still under 5%. So to think of the fact that we've gone in 25 years from 5% to 20% for dried plant, it's crazy. The potency has really dramatically shifted. And I know there's a huge message for people saying, if you use marijuana in the 90s and you're now raising a child in 2024, they're consuming something way different than you consumed. So if you're thinking back and comparing it to what was popular when you were in high school, that's not what we're dealing with anymore. So the concentrates are really 40 to 80%, and sometimes the crystallized forms could be up to 99% pure THC. And the way that they're extracting it is they're using things like butane to extract the THC from the leaf. So at this point, you're not even, the huge push for legalizing marijuana at one point was it's natural, it comes from the ground, it's a plant. But the things that people are consuming, especially vaping, is so far from its natural form. And it's being heated up, so now there's heavy metals involved. It's becoming an aerosol and is going directly into your lungs in the solution that's made of butane and other products. We don't know what the long-term effects of that are going to be, unfortunately. So we have to be concerned about lung health. We have to be concerned about the psychological effects, because again, the THC is so potent that now we have to worry about psychosis. We have to worry about the increased anxiety and the panic attacks, which unfortunately, a lot of people tend to gravitate towards marijuana to help with anxiety and depression, but we're seeing with the high potency products, it swings the other way. Hallucinations, and of course the other physical effects like your heart rate, your blood pressure. We're seeing a lot of digestive issues in terms of people not being able to hold food down. So again, it's going to take time to figure out what these long-term effects are, but it's definitely a concern to have this generation almost being guinea pigs to see what's going to happen and what's going to happen to the long-term health. One of the other big things that stood out for us this year was drinking and driving. So 7% of our students reported they've driven after drinking once or more in the last 12 months. That's up from 4% in 2021. When you look at just the senior class, because we know they're driving more than the other classes are based on their age, 18% of our 12th graders reported that they had driven after drinking once or more in the last 12 months. And that was up from 9% in 2021. We went back even before 2021 to see if it was kind of a blip, because again, the drinking rates plummeted in 2021, but in 2019, it was still 9%. So we know that we've seen an increase there. And 23% of our students reported that they have ridden in a car with a driver who'd been drinking at least once in the last 12 months. Now, that could be another student, it could be a parent, it could be a family member, a friend. We don't know who it is, but we know that 23% of our students are getting in the car with somebody who had been drinking. This also doesn't cover any other impaired driving. This is just drinking and driving, because that's what's covered in the survey. And now, and it's like, do we have another? Are we gonna bump it up to 21, 22 questions in 2 years? Because we have other questions to ask. You know, we don't know about distracted driving, driving after cannabis use, driving after prescription use, pill use. There's so many things to cover, and it's really hard to scale it back to trying to get everything. For depression and anxiety, as Scott mentioned, we added this one into our addendum because in the Search Institute survey, they do ask how often you've been felt sad or really down in a certain amount of time, but we felt like we wanted more concrete data. So we started using the PHQ-4, which is a screening tool that physicians use for anxiety and depression. We did go in the right directions. Now 25% of our students reported they have moderate or severe anxiety or depression. It's down from 28% 2 years ago. I will say our non-binary, gender fluid, and students who identify in the LGBTQIA+ categories are more likely to report moderate to severe anxiety and depression based on their population. So we see that boys are lowest, and then girls, and then our non-binary and gender fluid students. And then the same, our straight students are a lot lower than those who identify as being lesbian, gay, or bi. For attempted suicide, again, we went in the right direction here. So we're 10% of our students have reported they have attempted suicide at least once in their lifetime. So when you compare that to the national rate, it is 9%, but that's only in the last 12 months. This is across our students' entire lifetime. So it could have been 7th grade.
I just had a question about this slide because you have it listed male and female, but what about the students that don't identify?
So because this question is part of the Search Institute survey, the Search Institute survey doesn't break down by gender anything other than male and female. So if a student were to respond that they were transgender, male to female, they would fall into the female category. Then unfortunately, we don't get to capture our non-binary and gender fluid students.
I just didn't know if the data was getting kicked out or if it was being.
No, it's a limitation of, I love the Search Institute survey, but I absolutely love our addendum because I can track the data and cross-run it in so many different ways. And we don't have that ability with all the 160 questions. I wish we did.
So do you think based on that the number would be higher?
My guess is if we had to break it down by gender for total population, non-binary, gender fluid students might track higher, but it's also a much smaller population. So when you think about males and females, you could almost split the school in half between the percentage of males and females that we have. For our non-binary population, it's a pool of only 20 kids. So it really does dramatically skew the data at the same time, because when you think about 20 kids, and if 5 of them respond, then it's a really big percentage of that population, as opposed to like 275 girls or, so it's really interesting. Depending on the data point, sometimes we put in the numbers and sometimes we put in the percentages because it's such a small pool that it really does skew the data. But if I had to guess, it would be higher for our non-binary gender.
I just want to make sure this is actually attempted suicide, not
Yeah.
seriously considered suicide.
Yeah, not considered, but have attempted suicide at least once.
It's. I know it's going in the right direction, but those numbers are unacceptable and. I'm very glad that we have an administration, partnership with Youth and Family Services. And a board that are all working in the direction of addressing these things and the anxiety and depression epidemic. Special thanks to all of you for, for pitching in on that.
Absolutely. The fact that we're able to go into the schools and do QPR training, which is the suicide prevention training, is an incredible partnership that other schools are so jealous that we're able to do that. When I meet with other communities and they say that a couple of years ago, we trained our entire high school in QPR, suicide prevention, and now it's ingrained in freshman and 7th grade curriculum, that they're blown away. So we're really, really lucky to have the school district and the partnership that we do.
And we involve students in that, so we have staff that are responsible for the training itself, that they bring high school students into classes to have pieces of those presentations. So it's we hope, a very effective way of doing that suicide prevention piece.
As I mentioned, we included sexual assault and sexual harassment questions. We started doing that 2 years ago. We did trend in the right direction. So that's for sexual assault, it's decreased from 16% to 13%. Still a lot of work to do, but at least we're going in the right direction. And for students that responded that they've ever experienced sexual harassment, that decreased from 34% to 29.5%. Going in the right direction, still a lot of work to do. And I will say by number, female students are most likely to respond that they've been a victim of sexual assault, but based on percentage of the population, our non-binary and gender fluid students are much more likely to have experienced based on the size of their population.
Can I ask with regard to the middle one, the
Yeah.
middle bullet, students responding that they've experienced sexual harassment?
Yeah.
Once or more. Do you know what the national averages are for high school students?
Unfortunately, we cannot find a data point that we can easily compare ourselves to. Because again, we're really lucky to be able to ask the question. But we haven't found that they're really tracking that question, especially the way that we worded it. And we were really intentional with the way that we worded sexual assault and sexual harassment to use the language that they use in the health classes. So it's language that they're comfortable with. But on the flip side, when we try to look for state or national data, it compares it, a lot of times it boils down to intimate partner. And being harassed by an intimate partner or being assaulted by an intimate partner. So it's really hard. And it's so different that we really can't compare the data. I wish we could. We keep looking.
Well, I'm just glad to see that it's decreasing because
Yeah.
I know that they do work on that.
Yeah.
That pulse and that hand especially.
And we keep, it's funny because every time we get survey data back, I go back to search for anything that we can compare ourselves to. And like, come on, people, start asking the tough questions. The last big area of concern was eating disorders. So 20% of our students surveyed reported that they've engaged in anorexic or bulimic behavior. For males, it was 11%, 29% of females. So we're starting to approach almost a third of our female population has engaged in anorexic or bulimic behavior. Unfortunately, the girls are not going in the right direction. It really spiked up during the pandemic, and unfortunately, it's still climbing. Something that we're aware of, something that we've tried to address. I know Melissa Boletto's girls group has been concerned about this, and they've tried to encourage positive messages in the bathroom mirrors and all kinds of other things, but something that we hope starts to go down. But we're also battling social media and a bunch of other outside influences that are really hard to control. So continuing to really work on the self-esteem and the eating disorder behavior.
Just I want to mention just briefly, so just can you go back one real quick? One thing that's trending for males, and it's so if any of you have heard the term bigorexia, so that there's a sort of a newer trend where among males, it's the same kind of restrictive eating, but that the obsession comes with how your body looks, so that you're overtraining and over overdoing it in terms of just that, how you look and how big you are and how your muscles appear. So it's gaining a little bit more and more attention and research, but it basically looks like anorexia, only it's the obsession is really around the male being bigger and more, more like your Batman and other Marvel muscle bound people.
So are they dehydrating? Is that?
Yeah, so like they're just basically overdoing everything in terms of their training, and the same kind of issue that you have where there's a sort of a disconnect with how they really look versus how they feel.
What kind of things are we doing to address that?
That's what you want. Yeah, so
You said the bathroom mirrors, but I
Yeah,
feel like
so-
we need to do a lot more, right?
Oh, yeah, so we've tried to do, so we've done education through like the stall talks in the bathrooms. We've done the girls groups at the high school and at the middle school to try and address it, at least within those smaller populations, to branch out and to affect change. We've done the messages in the bathrooms. I know Melissa's done other things with the especially with the mentorship across the high school and the middle school.
And it's a part of the girl talk that they do in their health classes. We're probably being outpaced by everything that happens on social media. Like that's, like what we're doing, you have to kind of think of it this way. So many of these trends are being driven by social forces. So what we're doing is often not ever gonna come close to what they're consuming in other places. But we are doing what we can in the school. The school is very invested in doing this. It's our program, of course, but it's how teachers, I think, people in general are paying attention to this.
So for the 40 developmental assets, we know 49% of our students reported that they had 21 to 40 assets. We need to build that up. 8% of our students reported they had 0 to 10, but also 8% of our students had 31 to 40. So we need to continue to build those numbers. The more students we can get to the even 21 to 40 category, the better. The 40 developmental assets are 40 fundamental building blocks that the search institute has identified. The more the students have, the less likely they are to engage in risky behavior, substance abuse, and the more likely they are to be engaged in education, be resilient, and move forward with making healthy decisions. So in terms of how each asset's scored, each asset's carefully evaluated and considered either present or absent, depending on how students answer questions. And it's usually a series of questions. There are very few assets that only one question goes into it. One of them is reading for pleasure, and you're just asking how often they read for pleasure. But other ones are more complex. And then they're either a scale of number of hours spent or a scale from strongly agree to strongly disagree with I don't know in the middle. And depending on how students answer the series of questions, it determines on whether somebody has that asset. So to use safety for an example, if I were to say that I agree that I never worry about being hurt by somebody in my home. I agree that I never worry about being hurt by somebody in my school. But I disagree that I never worry about walking around my neighborhood by myself. Then it's going to say that I don't have that asset because I disagreed on one of the questions. So that's kind of how they're scored, just to give you an example. We know that assets they're not black and white. And usually some students have some form of that asset, but just for simplicity, because it's a survey, they had to figure out how to boil it down. So in terms of the 40 developmental assets, the good news is I'm not going to pull up all 40 and make you guys memorize it because it's a big list. But I'll break it down this way. So there's internal assets, and those are the things that young people need to develop within themselves. And there are external assets, and those are the supports they need to receive from their friends, family, school, and their community. So the internal assets are commitment to learning, positive values, social competencies, and positive identity. So we want them, to want to make a change in the world. We want them to be committed to school. We want them to feel good about themselves. We want them to make a difference. When you think about the external assets, that's where we kind of step in and we get to help provide support to these young people. So that's providing support, making sure that they feel empowered, making sure that they feel like they have boundaries and they have clear expectations for what we expect, and making sure that they have avenues for constructive use of their free time. So assets are important because we know that the more assets a student has, the less likely they are to engage in risky behavior and less likely they are to use substances. So if you look at this chart, if we were to get all of our students to that 31 to 40 range, they'd be making really smart decisions, and we would completely eliminate tobacco use, marijuana use, and prescription drug use, which is pretty amazing. So that's why we continue to work on the numbers and try to build up our young people so that we know, so that they feel supported, they feel engaged. They don't want to leave anybody disappointed by any decisions that they're making, and they don't want to disappoint themselves. So for our challenges, I will say our challenges don't change much year to year. Restraint has always been kind of low, but it's really interesting. So that one boils down to 2 questions. And it's just basically agreeing or disagreeing that they think that they either agree or disagree with the fact that they should or should not be sexually active or using alcohol or other drugs at any point in their teenage years. So it's really interesting because that one, when you compare it to the number of students who are actually sexually active or actually using drugs or alcohol, it doesn't match up. So they might feel a certain way, but it doesn't mean that they're engaging in the behavior. We know that parent involvement in schooling is usually pretty low. These are high school students, so it's not a surprise. The questions that go into that are: my parents ask about my homework, my parents attend school events or activities, my parents ask about what I'm learning in school. And here's the one that would put my kid off of the I have that asset list, but my parents help me with my homework. And I'm not gonna help my 15-year-old with trigonometry because they would have a worse grade than they do right now. So that one's a little bit trickier. And also, I'm at the point where I want to get my child out of the habit of getting my help for homework because they're gonna go off to college and I'm not gonna be there to help them with their homework. So that one, I think for high school, is traditionally low for other communities as well, because they're starting to learn more independence and taking control of doing their homework without parents necessarily sitting down and helping them do their homework, because it's really challenging and we haven't had to do trigonometry for a really long time. Community values youth, also an interesting question because it boils down to people in the community really value me, want to hear my voice, stuff like that. And even for adults, I'm not sure how many of us would say, I absolutely agree that people know who I am, know what I have to say, and really care about what I have to say. So I think that's a really challenging one for anybody to feel like the community values you as an individual. Creative activities. Our kids are really, really involved in a lot of clubs, sports, and activities. But when it comes to spending 3 or more hours a week in lessons or practice in music, theater, or the arts, they're less likely to be doing that. And reading for pleasure is always our lowest. It did go up a little bit this year, which is good. I think if we were to ask this question in the summertime, it would look a little bit different. But you have to remember we're asking this like on October 25th. So it's pretty early into the school year, and they're getting a lot of homework and less likely to be reading for pleasure at that point, and more likely to be focusing on doing their homework and other things and all the clubs and activities that they do.
That's what we say to make ourselves feel better.
For gender-specific trends, just in terms of a couple of concerns, self-esteem and safety are 2 where we see a really big gender gap. Both of the assets have come down over time. I compared it to the highest point that we've seen it. So in self-esteem, it was 2011. So since then, it's dropped from 57% to 41%. But the gap between the males and females is 54% of males say that they have a high self-esteem versus 28% of females. For safety, the highest that we saw was in 2015. We were at 76% then, now we're at 60%. But the gender gap there is between 74% of males say that they feel safe versus 48% of females. And again, when you look at those individual questions that go into it, the biggest gender gap we have there is feeling safe walking around your neighborhood. And it's really interesting because, you know, when I talk to girls about that, they talk about how my parents always tell me I need to be careful. My parents always tell me, like, you know, keep your keys. And we don't do that with boys. When boys go out for a walk, we say, have a good walk, have a good run, have a good jog. But when girls are going out for a run or a jog, it's, do you have your keys? Do you have this? Do you make sure you have your cell phone on you? So it's really interesting because if I compare that question to even my husband, and I've talked about like, oh, we want to make sure that, the lights are on and this is, and he doesn't think about those things necessarily, but it's been so ingrained in me as a female to always be aware of who's around, always make sure your keys are readily available, always make sure you have your phone to call somebody if you need help. And it's really interesting how, as a society in general, we treat males and females different in terms of how safe they feel, especially being alone. When you don't have a male with you to keep you safe. So it's just, unfortunately, that one hasn't shifted much. I always like to end with positive things. So the things that we're doing really, really well, and we're doing really, really well. School engagement is our top asset. Youth programs. So again, not the creative activities, unfortunately, but young people spending 3 or more hours a week in sports, clubs, organizations at school. Have you guys been to the high school after high school is out? People don't go home. They're still there and it is still busy. They're achievement motivated. They have wonderful family support where they feel like they're loved and they are cared for. They have positive peer influence and they feel like they have a sense of integrity. Those are all incredible things. Their kids are feeling the support and they're building those things within themselves to move forward and to have, a rich, successful life. So the big thing with building assets is we need to go from young people's problems to thinking about young people's strengths and what they're doing really well, building on those assets that we know we have. We need to go from this is work that professionals do to this is everybody's work. We need to go from young people are using resources to young people are resources. We need to go from focusing on just individual programs to thinking about the relationships that we're building in those programs and making sure that our kids feel supported, valued, and they're making connections. We need to go from we're already building assets because we are, to we need to continue to build assets intentionally and make sure that we're making those intentional connections. And I went the wrong way, didn't I? No. Okay. We're good. And last, just thinking about your assets. So I think we could all think back to when we were high school age and think about the people that really made a difference and a positive impact on your lives. And thinking about how they made you feel, what they did to make you feel that way, how they made those connections to make you feel like you were cared for or they engaged with you. Remembering that assets are, again, an approach, not a program. Everybody can build them. Everybody here is an asset to our young people. You guys are all spending your time volunteering to make the lives of our school kids better and to really help shape that. Assets focus on the strengths of young people and building those fundamental relationships. We all know that when we're surrounded by people that we think care about us and we want to spend time with, we flourish. People don't like walking into an office building if they don't like any of their coworkers, but if they like all their coworkers, they like the work they're doing, suddenly work doesn't feel so bad. So it's kind of the same as assets. You want to make sure that they feel cared for, listened to, and then they suddenly want to be there. They want to do their best. It doesn't take a lot of time to build assets. Sometimes it's as simple as walking into Starbucks and getting your coffee and saying hi to the teenagers that are waiting for their coffee. It's just those little intentional actions that really help build assets and support young people. And as we know, it reduces risky behavior, but it also helps school performance and it helps set them up for success. And I tried to keep it really short because there's a lot of information and some of you have already seen it. But I will say the full survey and previous surveys are up on our website, as well as the State of the Youth presentation, which was the full PowerPoint with the panel of our young people that were also present.
So it could have been longer.
No question. So we have this survey and we do it every year. Now, what do we do with it? So we have it, we
Yeah.
know it.
So we do it every 2 years.
No, but what do we do with
Yes.
that information?
And that's a great question, because I think discussing it, acknowledging that we've got these strengths and we've got these challenges. I think there's a piece of this, as we try to present it out into the community, it's to educate the community so people know what's going on here. And we hope as many people engage in that as possible. this for us affects our programming, the kind of things that we talk about in our groups. And having, you know, like Gail here and Dr. Cook here, like they take these things and they make sure that they get turned into, they affect lesson plans and other things. I don't want to speak for you guys, it's not my plate. But I know that that's what they do. We may at times look at like campaigns and things that we can do that are based on the survey. So that's what we'll do.
So to speak to some of the more like, pointed things that we've done, the reason that we did the QPR trainings in all the classrooms is because of the suicide and the depression and anxiety data that we've received. So it directly goes to impacting what programs we implement. I also co-run a group called Roots with Justin from our office. And every single thing we do in that group is directed by the school survey and what the needs are based on what's popped up. So we've done things to engage the community. We've done things to engage other students. Right now, we're working on creating a PSA and a bunch of other materials that will not only go through the high school, but go through the middle school as well. One of the big things that we're working on is something that the middle school teachers will be able to show in choices and other avenues about breaking up the myth that everybody in the high school drinks and does drugs. And really focusing on the positive aspects, so they go about it saying, we have reasons not to do these things. Not everybody is doing these things, and it's our expectation as you come up to Daniel Hand that you will not be doing these things either.
Do you do that in a large group like it is in
So that'll
an assembly type?
be the whole 8th grade.
It's a choice, so choices, the choices program, we have 2 of our staff that bring a group of high schoolers that are mostly peer advocates. And they come and they address kids in their 8th grade health classes. So it's called choices and it's basically the students.
So you reach all the kids?
Yes.
We've also used it to create assembly programs, so we'll have an assembly for the junior class before prom, the senior class before prom. And they're also gonna do a high school assembly based on the drunk driving stats, because once they saw that, they went in and immediately booked that as well. So depending on what kind of bubbles up as a concern is how we shift and pivot and bring information into the schools and community.
Can I also add, as a board and a district, we've done a lot of stuff directly that absolutely impacts what we learned about tonight. And we've done it thoughtfully and we've done it purposefully. One of the things we do, for example, is the way we partner with Madison Youth and Family Services. We have 2 Youth and Family Services employees in our schools as counselors at Polson and the high school as permanent additions that are funded through Madison Youth and Family Services.
No, those are funded.
They're funded,
Through the
they're
town.
funded by us. through the-
Yeah.
Yes.
Yeah,
Yeah, through the town.
Yeah.
That's a big difference, Seth.
well, Madison Youth and Family Services is an arm of the town.
Right,
It's a department of the town. So yes,
I
it's
understand.
absolutely funded by the town.
I wish that the board would fund
Well-
Madison. Youth
Well,
and
we
Family.
have, and that's the other thing that I was gonna say is we've also added social workers and other mental health supports in our budget. We've done it actively, thoughtfully over the last few years. The ESSER funds coming off and we've added 2 social workers that we have to carry on our budget now.
Yeah.
We voted to do that. And I congratulate and thank all of you for being on board for that. We, over the past couple of years, we've retooled, with Gail's help and our curriculum writers, we've retooled all of our curricula to include social emotional learning. We also, thanks to Craig and his work with the building administrators, we've incorporated social emotional learning and mental health supports into our school, what do they call it, development plans. Let's get that wrong. So we've done a lot and we've been way more proactive than a lot of boards that I've talked to at CABE. And we have to get those numbers down
Yeah.
even more. There's an absolute epidemic of anxiety, depression, eating disorders, and we are doing the right stuff and it's starting to show positive traction and by some of these numbers coming down, but we have to keep doing it. We have to keep on it.
So I would like to say thank you. I think that
Thank
you have done a phenomenal job. I think your work is noticed by many. I think that Erin Corbett at the high school is a phenomenal asset. I think people are waiting outside her door. She is empathetic, she is understanding, she is sweet, she is caring. I can't say enough about her and your program. I think some of the numbers concern me. One is the alcohol, the drinking and the driving. And every time you turn the TV on, you hear about it. And you hear about wrong way drivers and alcohol. And I'm wondering, only because I sat on a different board of ed in a different town. And every 3 or 4 years, they would do a DARE program. And they would have a mock drunk driving kind of thing outside right before prom. So you would have a mock car crash with, and I'm not suggesting this, I'm just thinking it out loud. And the ambulance would be there, police would be there. Unfortunately, a funeral parlor would be there. And they would mock out a complete drunk driving accident. And I can tell you, I've been to it, I've seen it. It is so powerful. And those kids just, everyone's speechless at the end of it. And I'm just wondering, is that something that we've ever thought of doing here?
It's something that we've done, I can't say we've done it here in Madison, not in the time that I've been here, but I've been involved with other
Yeah.
communities that have done it. And
Have
one of
you-
the reasons that we kind
What
of,
was your reaction to it?
one of the reasons that we kind of got away from doing that is it wasn't an evidence-based strategy. Because it looks amazing and it gets a lot of attention. But unfortunately, the way that kids' brains are wired, it only stays in their brain for at maximum 48 hours.
Really?
Then poof, it's gone.
Wow.
So one thing that they were seeing, statistically, is kids might be impacted for 24 to 48 hours. If it was right before prom, then suddenly the thoughts of prom creep back in and they're like, okay, it's go time. So they started getting away from it. What we do is we do pre-prom assembly for both juniors and seniors, but we also reinforce it with messaging before and after. We talk about hitting even social media. So one thing that our students have worked on this year is creating social media posts that will go out through the schools. Hopefully we're working on getting Chris Farrell to put it out through the athletic sites and to have our students strategically put it out through Instagram channels that they know other kids are watching and sharing. Because they don't want it to be like, oh, here are the schools coming to tell us this, or here's MYFS coming to tell us this, but to have it more of a homegrown, this is our message. So it's a matter of just not doing these things in isolation too, but following it up with other messages,
Yeah.
messages to parents, which I know is one thing that we're really lucky to have the schools to be able to spread those messages out, but it, as long as it's not done as just like a quick assembly or a quick boom, here's a mock car crash. They can be effective, but it has to be part of a more comprehensive approach.
I'm surprised to hear that it doesn't retain
Yeah,
longer, because it's been 9 years and I still remember it, like,
Yeah.
it's.
it's really interesting because, so my background is I got involved with prevention when I was only 13. And I was part of my local prevention council. And then I was really involved with MAD at the state level. I was one of the board members. And it was really interesting, so I was a board member right around the time that they're like, oh, this is an evidence-based and everything pivoted to environmental strategies. So it was really interesting to be a part of that, but I still remember the mock car crash that I had at my high school.
Yeah.
But it was really interesting because prevention was already ingrained in my brain, so
Yeah.
it's stuck in there,
It's
but,
Yeah.
not,
It depends on the child. on the
Yeah.
student.
so it's not impactful for general population long term.
I appreciate that, I appreciate that.
So I remember when I was in high school a long time ago, the town got a car that was wrecked from drunk driving and where the driver had to be extricated with the jaws of life, and they parked it at the high school next to the school, and it stayed there from prom through graduation as a visual reminder. Would that make any type of different impact because it's like or do they eventually just not see it anymore?
They start to get desensitized to it. And the other thing that we battle is adolescents tend to have a that won't happen to me mentality.
Yeah, can't get hurt
So
all
we have very empathetic, amazing youth that will sit and listen to a victim talk about how they lost their child and be devastated and call their mom and cry and say, I love you. But at the same time, not necessarily have it resonate that, oh, that could happen to me. So I think it's tough because we have to reinforce those messages, but we also have to create a system in place so that those things aren't happening.
You still do safe rides?
No, we had to stop during the pandemic and,
And I wondered if it started.
yeah.
That was
It
such a
wasn't-
great
I
thing.
know, I was a fan of it too, but it was a really hard program
Yeah.
to keep running and it had a lot of insurance liability things that we
I know.
always had to deal with.
Too bad.
Yeah, but I mean, we also now have things like Uber and other things that kids are much more comfortable with and are safe alternatives, so like. Our people now is we just need to educate teenagers on that and make sure they know where their resources are for safe rides.
Well, I appreciate it. My daughter uses it.
I just have to thank you so much. Super information. I really appreciate everything you do. I have two quick questions. What were the response rates like?
So we had. I think of the number, 120 people either not take the survey or have them thrown out based on the way they were answering, out of the 800, just under 800.
Okay. And then do you always do the survey at the same time of year? In the
Yes,
fall?
we always do it in the fall, right around the same week, because
Right.
we realized that if we switched to the springtime suddenly, we would have really skewed data. But we're really lucky in the fact that Guilford and Clinton also do the same Search Institute survey the same time of year every 2 years, just like we do, so we're all on the same schedule, which is kind of nice.
And then my last question about the alcohol use, increase in past 30 days, did you see rates of like parental disapproval go down over that time period? The perception of harm too?
Yeah, so it was interesting because for alcohol, parental disapproval, peer disapproval, and perception of harm all went down slightly for alcohol.
Yeah.
They all went up slightly for cannabis.
Yeah,
So
And
that
for
was really
vaping
interesting
too?
that we kind of stayed the line on cannabis use, and that was the one substance that all those three went up, all those three indicators.
okay, interesting.
The demographic that had lower substance abuse rates were our LGBTQ plus kids, which we found, when you look at when we looked at that population, like they certainly showed more severity in terms of anxiety, depression, but lower rates of substance abuse. And we think of that in terms of like, what kind of supports do we have for those kids? And we've got a very strong group at the high school, a very strong group at Olson, that are support and advocacy based. And we've got a strong, clergy, community and town that provide a lot of support outward and direct. And so I just think that you have things that we think are helping to support that group and helping to mitigate some of the things that they otherwise could do that's unhealthy.
My last question, did you see alcohol rates higher for girls and boys?
Yep,
Really?
not a huge difference, but it's the girls definitely outdrink the boys, but the boys outsmoke the girls.
Yeah. Thank you.
I thank you for your report. And the balanced nature of it, that there are definite positives and definite so positives. My continuing concern, that is a challenge for the schools is, the pathways for communicating around some of these issues like sexual assault or suicide attempts. And, frequently in my experience, friends and other young people have the information that often the adults don't. And they have concerns about sharing that information because of mandated reporting and so forth, so, you know. I mean, it's just, you know, we've got a large number of young people that have been sexually assaulted. You know, and that's a tough one, you know, people hang on to that for years and don't tell anyone. You know, and so, you know, how you get around, I mean, there's a very good and positive reasons for having reporters, you know. On the other hand, you know, it also becomes an impediment for people sharing things that are critically important for family members and community to know about. I don't know the answer to it, but it's a continuing challenge.
I have to think about the work that we all do is relational. If we can think about how do we create as many connections between the adults and the kids, it really is the most protective factor that we can have. Because if you have one kid who has maybe 3 or 4 safe adults, you increase the chances that they're gonna share something or something's gonna get caught earlier than it would if, say, they're more isolated, they have less assets and less support around them. I always like to think that's teachers, coaches, piano teachers, aunts, uncles, friends, like, you know, if we think of it as putting as many safe, responsible adults around our kids and just saying hello, like what Catherine said is so true, and it's really, it's common sense, it's almost self-evident, like more of that we do, the safer and healthier our kids are.
But the sad thing, and to Stephen's point, is that sometimes when a child goes to someone and reports something, unfortunately, that leads there too and becomes a bigger thing. So it's a really hard call, I mean, because you're mandated reporters and maybe a child wants to tell you something, but is afraid where it will go from there because they've been in that situation.
Yeah.
I think what's important too, and this is purely on a personal level for us, we lost someone to suicide last year, almost a year ago. And we all sat around and we continually said to ourselves, what did we miss? And where were the signs? And how did we not see what was going on? And that's the part that I don't understand. And I think if we educate parents more, sometimes we think everything's wonderful and then it's not. So I guess the sign, I would never want this to happen to anyone, but I guess there has to be something that is there that we're missing, or maybe not, but it's a struggle because the blame is always there.
Hard to sort of sum up suicide prevention in a short sentence, but I mean, that's, what you're talking about really is what we talk about in QPR.
Yeah.
So that's looking at what are the signs and the symptoms, as well as how you want to approach somebody if you have any question at all. And it's a very difficult topic, especially for all of us that have lost people to suicide, which I have too. It's something that probably everybody in this room has probably got a story or something.
And I look now, and this was a college student, and I now that my daughter's going off to college, I now sit there and it is so apparent that that college, there's something really wrong on that level at some point, because we don't know just how bad it is. And then you do the research and you're like, are you kidding? It's that bad out there. So I thank you. Really, I don't say, I mean that for everything that you do.
We really do appreciate it. We appreciate your time and your support and your collaboration. And if there's other questions or other things that we could do to help anybody out, we're always happy to do that.
Thank you. Thank you so much. Thank you.
Thanks for being such a great partner and a great resource to us and to our students. Greatly appreciate it.
Thank you.
Okay, this is a sobering and somber report, but also some good news as well. It's always a mixed bag, but it's always a worthwhile report to get every other year, so. Now we move on to agenda item 5, board members' comments. Does anybody have any comments that they wanted to make? Comments? I'll use this opportunity to report to the board that last night the Board of Finance met. And unfortunately, they voted unanimously to reduce our proposed budget by $240,000. Now, it's very disappointing to me personally, and it may come as, a disappointment to some of you as well. And I know Craig shares the disappointment that, not only did we come in with a very responsible budget under the difficult budget cycle and some of the drivers behind our budget this year, we came in with a very responsible 3.41% proposal that was among the very lowest proposals in the state. And we met with other leaders in the town, and after understanding a little bit better what their goals were for for tax impact and in a difficult tax year because of valuation, we were able to identify an additional $200,000 that we felt that we could voluntarily sustain as an additional cut from our budget. And despite that, somewhat gratuitously, in my opinion, the Board of Finance added an additional $40,000 on top of that. We'll go back to the drawing board. Craig is very good at this stuff, and I'm sure we'll find a way to cut that additional $40,000. But I want to thank the board for kind of supporting our efforts to come in with a low budget, and also to even cut further voluntarily when we were asked to. From here we go and find another 40,000. I hope it doesn't have to come out of educational programming, but that remains to be seen. Procedurally from here, Dr. Cook will work with the administration and with Stacy and try and identify where we can find those additional savings. He will report back to us, and we will vote on that new plan once Craig recommends it to us. Anything else on that?
That's a lot of money. They want us to take out of the budget.
Yeah, I mean, as Seth shared, we were at the lowest, and now we're even lower. This brings us in just about 3%, just barely over 3%. We have a meeting scheduled tomorrow. We extended it with our admin team to look at, what our ideas are for that. We'll come back. I know Galen's going to share the slate. We're looking at April 2nd for a finance committee meeting to start that discussions. And typically when we've had kind of that new reduction, unless we can find, something that changes, like in health insurance, which I'm not expecting whatsoever to change, something real tangible like that. We've oftentimes waited till the budget is passed, because we could have to look further. If the budget does not pass in the town, vote, then we could have to even cut beyond the 240. So, that will continue to follow that, and hopefully we come up with something that doesn't really hurt students.
I know there was chatter about the 200,000. What now led to the additional 40?
Personally, I can't speak for the Board of Finance. I mean, I watched the meetings.
I
think that
believe they said it was a 1% cut, not including obligatory
salary accounts. Yeah, so the town, when they developed the town budget, they went through an exercise I think after department heads had submitted their budget to reduce another 1%, not including salaries, which I believe is what I understand. So some departments had to come up with, a small amount, other departments had to come up with a bigger amount, and that led to a reduction in their budget. I think they calculated what a 1%, not including salaries, would mean to our.
Or other
our budget.
contractual
Yeah,
increases, right?
right.
So they asked for our expertise to help find areas for cutting, and we did. And then they, did something otherwise. So,
Well, I mean, I don't think it's something personal.
No.
It was, they did a 1% cut at the town level, and so they're asking the Board of Ed to do a 1% cut at the Board of Ed level.
yeah, they found it kind of interesting, and they liked that Peggy went back as the first select woman and asked each department to find an additional 1% they could cut. My understanding is not all the departments were able to find a full 1%. But they sought to impose that on us, like, hey, if it worked for the town, maybe that would also work for the Board of Ed. Let's just ask them to cut 240,000 because that's 1% other than those 2 lines we mentioned. And but the problem is, it doesn't work the same way for the Board of Ed because we have, certain responsibilities under education law and the statutes and all of that, and our responsibilities to special ed students and everything. You can't just say that, if we have special ed carefully, budgeted based on a rollover of a certain number of students, for example, that we know have special needs requirements. We can't say, well, cut 1% from that anyway. That's just one example,
I know, but I don't think that's what they're saying. I think.
No, it's not. I don't think that they intended it that way, but that's the net effect. And it was pointed out.
Yes, they also did mention, I watched the meeting because I didn't attend it. But there was some talk about potentially covering costs because I know that the Board of Ed can't save money for for instance, band uniforms, because we don't have that ability to just roll money over into the budget for next year. So they are aware of, that our budget works differently than theirs. And it sounded like they were going to try to find a way to cover some of the costs that were sort of one-off costs that we have, that if we cut it, and there are no guarantees, but I'm just saying that there was talk about that. So I don't think that they were being, completely unfair. I'm not saying I agree or disagree with them, but they were implementing a 1% cut at town level. They're asking for a 1% cut. Obviously, they can't tell us where to cut, so.
Well, and they also discussed, the Board of Ed and the district give back a couple $100,000 each year. Therefore, they didn't call it fat in the budget, but their assumption was that we can find the money somewhere. What they didn't realize, or they didn't articulate during their vote, because I was at the meeting, but it was pointed out to them in the past by me personally, before this vote, that the way we end up with money left over at the end of the year, because any budget is a planning tool, right? You don't have a crystal ball and know exactly what's gonna happen, but what usually happens is we'll get an unexpected retirement or a resignation because a teacher picks up and moves to a different state or to a different district. Or chases more money in a different district or something like that. If one special needs student, their family moves out of town. If we have fewer snowstorms in a given year, little pockets like that. And because we manage tightly and really well throughout the year, we end up with a little bit of leftover money. And we have worked in the past to either reclaim some of that with cooperation or to just give it back to the states or to the town. So, it's not like we build in fluff. We really don't. And you all know, I'm speaking to the choir on this, but preaching to the choir on this, but.
I think, it would be something for us to be mindful of, that when we build our budget, we always go on a base budget from the year before. And if we look at the budget that we passed this year, and I voted for the budget, so clearly I support it. But if you look at some of where the money was going to be spent, for instance, like furniture for the bridge at the high school, that's a one-off cost, right? So if you look at the budget, and of course it's not that much, But if you look at where we would start then for the budget next year, it should be that much lower because that is a one-off cost. It shouldn't be built into an annual budget. And so, you know, I can see from that perspective that, you know, maybe we can reduce, you know,
So we
here and
don't have a
there,
mechanism.
nickel dime, but we don't have a way to save.
Exactly, so,
But the town does, so.
But you do have a way to save when it comes to, at the end of the year, I'm sorry to interrupt you. At the end of the year with reserves over to special education, we can do that.
only because we created about 10 years ago, we created
Everyone
a
has
special
created.
fund.
Every board event has created that mechanism.
There are a lot that have.
There are a lot that do.
Yeah.
So, but I look at. We could agree to disagree. I did not watch the meeting, but, you know, I think at some point they're being fair. I mean, we have to get back. I mean, Galen, what do you think? I look to you because you're on finance, and then Emily.
I'm just gonna say that we should wait for Dr.
Yeah,
Cook's
I agree.
administration. Present options, and then it's a great discussion,
I agree.
to talk about local finance, you know.
And another meeting.
Another meeting.
Yes.
If I could just respond to a couple things, so we're
Yeah.
set, because I think it's important for people who might be watching and just for all of us as well. We do, as we go through as an administration, we look at 3 to 5 year averages of all the different accounts, so whether it's snow removal or electricity or all those things, we do look at that as we go through and we build our budget. As Seth said, every year we have something that's positives that happen, we have negatives that happen, so we can't budget, you know, just for the, you know, just take off the positives for the following year. And I will say, we do have things that come off that are, whether they're 1 year or 2 year accounts. So this year's a perfect example. We had a curriculum teacher in charge of writing curriculum that was one of the teachers reduced in this budget, and that would have been the band uniform reduction a year from now. If that ultimately does stay in the budget, you would see a $90,000 reduction. But then you'd probably see something else replacing that. Like every year there are things, and I think that just about every district, except the ones that you might read about in the paper, return money to the town at the end of the year. We do have 2 accounts. We have a maintenance account that we're able to carry over, and we have a special ed at 350,000. Our mechanism to get the 350,000 though is we do have to go back to the council. So we try to avoid that and make, you know, line item transfers within if we can handle it ourselves, because we want to keep that 350,000, because that really does represent maybe 1 or 2 students, you know, coming in new into the district that could be outplaced, or 2 new outplacements. So we always have to be cognizant of that. There is some proposals for new language that would give us more flexibility over that money going forward. But I will say, and the town does not land on 0 each year. They land on, you know, a positive number, and so then they're able to put that into the fund balance. We land on a positive number. I'm always going to try and do that. Stacy's always going to try and do that, so that we can do that. We go through that exercise, but we still get bills in July that we don't know how much they're going to be, you know, in June 30th when we have to expend that money. So we follow those accounting principles, and, you know, like I said before, you know, we're always going to have some positive variance at the end of the year, hopefully. You know, if we don't, then, you know, we're going to have to dip into one of those 2 accounts to cover that.
And if we don't, if there's a budget shortfall, Board of Ed members are personally liable for it, so, you know. Be careful to not cut too close to the quick.
Kudos to Stacy.
Yes, yeah, no, I think
Kudos
it's
to Stacy, yeah.
I've watched over many years the process in other districts of Board of Finance training boards of education. And the way they do that is every year the Board of Education puts together what they think is a responsible budget, and then it gets cut. And before very long, after several years, the Board of Education learns that this is how the game is played. And so the next time they make a budget, it isn't quite as responsible, and there is fluff because they anticipate the way to protect our programs is to build something in to protect our programs. I've been gratified, I'm a new member on the Board of Education. I've been gratified to look at how this board has approached budget and how responsible it has been and how, as you stated, we had the smallest increase of probably any board anywhere. So it's disheartening, but I look at that dynamic and I go, is this a training exercise? Just my 2 cents.
Food for thought.
So minus the 240,000, you said we're about a 3% increase, but our contractual obligations are like at 2.7, aren't they?
Correct.
All right, well, thank you all for listening and engaging in that discussion. I think it's important because that's one of our main functions as a board is to prepare and maintain and vote on the budget. So thank you. Any other board member comments? No? Okay. Any audience response to information presented? Okay. Is there anyone online? No? Okay, thanks. All right, let's move on to board committees and liaison updates, curriculum and student development. Steve.
We have not met since the last meeting.
Okay. Facilities committee, Emily.
No report.
Okay. Finance committee, Galen.
Upcoming.
Okay. Personnel committee, Maureen.
We had not met, no report.
Okay. And policy committee, I know that there's a
We met,
report there.
We met
I
tonight.
feel like you count on one report.
So we did meet tonight, and I'm looking for my agenda. We discussed mainly, 9,000 and 5,000 series. Our goal, so and I met, our goal is to power through the 9,000 series before the end of the year. And also, hopefully the 5,000 series, hitting some of the 4,000 series and clean it all up. So, making some headway, had a lot of discussions today, some things will come forward to the board, some will not, some will go back to be reworked. But on our agenda this evening, we have policies for a second read for rescission in the 5,000 series and a couple in the 9,000 series, and I'll just remind you that the 9,000 series require a 2/3 vote of the board. And we have policies up for a second read for review, 5,000, and again, 9,000 series that require 2/3. You should have policy summary with notes from Shipman and Goodwin in your packet. And if you have any questions regarding it, I'll try to answer.
Any questions for Diane? Thank you. Board, learn liaison. Marianne, have they met?
Yes, we met, the basic thing or the most important thing is superintendent perspective, and it was Superintendent Stonington Public Schools, Marianne Butler. That was the big thing. It was a short meeting.
Thank you. All right, now we have an item on the agenda that was asked to be added, to request by 3 board members to add a discussion, regarding demand zero, and adding that to a future board agenda. So, I'd like to open that discussion. I think, we kind of spoke a little bit at, not the last meeting, but the previous meeting. My feelings are, I think it would be great. I think maybe, we can talk about having another evening program. One of the things that I have a big concern about was covered in the presentation from Madison Youth and Family Services tonight, is the increase in use of cannabis derivatives, and especially the insane potency of the modern cannabis products. And I think that can serve in some ways as a gateway to some of the opioids. And so I think
The cannabis can be laced with that.
yeah, of course.
So,
So I think it might be good to have a dual program.
I mean, I
Have
can
demand zero.
actually read a little statement.
Yeah,
No, go ahead, you read your statement first and then I have something to say.
From demand zero. So actually what demand zero would do is just take all this, and just kick it up a little bit. And while they're working there, she's working with them and also with our chief drum. So the police department here in Madison works with Demand Zero. So what I was thinking is that she could come with maybe Chief Drum or one of the officers that they deal with in New Haven and just present her what this whole group, Demand Zero, I'm a part of it too, is all about. And just to get a sense, so everyone can get a sense of it. I mean, the movie I think is fantastic. I mean, I love the movie and I hope that a lot of the kids watch the movie, but the broader spectrum is that this affects so many kids everywhere, you know, in the whole state. They've done statewide programs. So if we could combine all this and just have some sort of a presentation, either in the schools or at least have her come here to talk to us and then see where we want to go with it from there.
So my statement is just, I support anything that's going to bring awareness and, you know, reduce the usage. But I guess my feeling on this is, like, where are we going with this? Because typically, you know, as a board, we do certain things. We do budget, we do policy, we do curriculum. But when it comes to presentations within the schools, we leave that to the administration. And we know that we have built into our curriculums, et cetera, some other similar programs. And I don't think that we should always use the same stuff all the time because, you know, it gets lost, it loses its impact. But I think that maybe it would be better to have Demand Zero meet directly with like TJ and work with him to say, here's our presentation. We would like to bring this into the high school and work with him for him to decide the programming within his own school. And the same with Polson.
Well, it has been shown on Polson.
But wasn't that for the whole community? If they just used Polson?
Well, it was, but it was at the school.
Right, but it was open to the whole community. I'm talking about like a school building specific program. But I don't feel like unless like what happened before was I forget what it was now, it's up. Forgetting, but anyway, getting old. There was something that was done at the high school and then they came to the board and presented to us and said, this is what we're doing at the high school and we all loved it, yada, yada. But what you're suggesting is that they come to us and then we tell the high school, administer this. And that's the precedent that I don't like.
Well, I don't think that we're gonna tell them to do it. I'm just saying that if they came here and showed the presentation to people, maybe we could influence, because I don't think TJ wants to do it. I've talked to him.
You talk to him as
He doesn't.
parent or as a Demand Zero
As an
person?
administrator. I mean, I just.
Yeah, my understanding is that TJ had some solid reasoning behind why he felt it might not be appropriate to show as part of the school curriculum or a program at the school, but then there was
There's
compromise.
a modified version.
Okay, but there was a compromise to show it not as part of the school program, but at Polson at
But
an
it is in
evening
our
community.
It is in our curriculum.
Patrick, can you speak to this?
Yeah, and I might call on Gail in terms of the curriculum piece, but I think I'm just trying to define what the best way to work with the request is. And so, I mean, my thought coming into tonight would be to offer another Polson night event where we try and bring the community into that. So that would get a wider audience rather than, and if we did something short here, that would be something
Well,
different, but I
just so
think.
people could understand.
Yeah, I think we get more attendance at that type of event. There was a statewide event, unfortunately hit exams because of our trimester schedule.
And that was excellent.
Right.
Well, that's why I was saying
But
if
that's
they could work directly with
why I'm
TJ
thinking.
because he knows the high school schedule. So like if the community that you hit, the percentage of community that they got at Polson last time, it kind of left out a lot of the high school because it was during the exams, et cetera, or whatever.
No, that was totally different.
There was one during the day for
Oh, yeah.
students and that hit but we communicated with Lisa about that,
Right.
she understood.
I just think it's such a.
Couldn't we partner up with Madison Youth and Family? with Demand Zero? Since their report tonight was amazing. And they're admitting that there's clear issues. THC is at 90% with butane. I don't know any of this. I've learned it tonight. But if that is so concentrated and kids are using and buying off a street drug, and it's laced with exactly what Demand Zero is saying, this the fentanyl, then I think it would just make perfect sense for, if Madison Youth and Families in our school, then for those two to connect and somehow be able to kind of endorse it.
That's what I'm exactly, like your point exactly. I was thinking have a dual program, like at Polson in the evening.
Absolutely.
And have
Yeah.
both Demand
Yeah.
Zero and Madison Youth and Family Services cover those two related topics.
Yeah,
And I think it will spark better conversation because the parents and students will
Yes.
attend together.
yes, I agree completely, and I,
Family services will be a draw.
Yeah.
Even, I mean,
Yes.
because this is a great, but it's not
Yes.
as known.
I agree. No, I agree
Yeah.
completely, and I think it's something that the kids, and again, I go back to my daughter, my youngest leaving, and I'm, they're. Some of these kids, I'll admit it, she's naive when it comes to a lot of this, and I think to see something like this and understand it, she may not retain it, but at least she'll have seen it, and I think that Madison Youth would be receptive to this.
Yeah.
Well, maybe Mary Ann, you could bring it to them.
Yeah,
You're on.
I'm not sure if Lisa has, but I will find out.
And I can
I was thinking that tonight too.
involve as well.
Yeah.
We'll make sure we
Yeah.
communicate and follow up.
Yeah.
And Gail, in terms of
I
the,
mean, I just didn't know if you guys wanted to see it, listen to her. That's. I'm sorry.
Yeah, the board actually adopted our health units last year, so. Those are posted up in the website, and also our social emotional units were adopted last year. And in the health units, the film is a resource in some of our lessons in the high school. So it is listed as a resource and is there, and it is a, Mary Ann found it, a version that didn't have any language in it. So we felt comfortable, being able to include that as a resource. But also, just in general, lots of the topics, I was scrolling through the website as Scott was presenting. I heard the presentation once before, and just so many of the topics and the concerns are consistently hit in our curriculum. So I could look up word after word after word. You can see that Madison Youth and Family Services is listed as supports QPR training happening in 7th grade and in 9th grade directly connected to them. And very unique, I think, for our community. I walked out with Scott saying, I've never seen anything like this in any other community. So it is a strong partnership. And I do think that we work in tandem when something comes up that's new or different. Scott will reach out to me and say, this is what we're hearing, and we'll jump on it and find a way to include it. So I did want to add that. That was kind of one of the questions that you asked earlier. But yeah, it's there.
I'm just concerned about the process. We have one employee. Dr. Cook. So, and we have a curriculum committee, and we have processes for looking at what we do within our schools. I don't see it as the board's job to pick programs, promote them, speak directly to school administrators in advancing those. On the other hand, we could have a presentation and have concerns and talk to our superintendent saying, I think we need to do more, or I think we need to do things in this direction. And maybe you and your curriculum person can look at those, but I think we need to stay in our lane.
But we did do that. We did speak with the superintendent and the assistant superintendent, who said to speak to the.
They sent you
To
to talk to the
to
principal?
I mean, I think it's good for the board to say, this is what we're interested in, we wanna see more programming like this. You know,
That's why it was brought up.
yeah, and I think, you know. Every time you can present it a different way so that it's new, you know, maybe it'll stay for another 48 hours in their head.
Yeah, no, that's it.
Yeah, so.
I don't think you can beat them out of that.
But I also think to Steve's point is that based on the information and the assessment that was done in October. As a board, we would be remiss if we didn't think that we had to do more. Because we do. There's a problem.
It's a big problem.
There's, and it's not just drugs, it's suicide, it's drinking and driving, it's drugs, I mean, she spent 10 minutes on THC alone. So I think as I agree that we shouldn't dictate policy with programs, but I think that if we can make the connection with Madison Youth and this particular program, it's a win-win.
Right, and Gail, do you feel that you have enough direction from this discussion to kind of?
Yeah, and like I said, I feel much more comfortable if we're looking at a community event, because I think these are community issues. You know, I don't think these are all things that are responsibility, they all are responsibility of the district. We cannot do them alone though. You know, I think there's a lot of those things in there in that report that point to anxiety, that point to a lot of other things, and I think some of those pressures are coming from the homes as well. I mean, there are some policy decisions that would not be very popular, I think, in the community, that we could go down those paths, limiting the number of AP courses that the students can take, you know, doing away with all class rank, doing away with, you know, other things. And so, I mean, I think that's a bigger discussion I think we could get into at some point, but I think in terms of tonight's agenda item, I like the outcome of this. I think that's a good piece. We do so much during the day. I think we have a good balance. We don't talk about it enough, but we have our multi-tiered system of supports as well for social emotional. So we do have, you know, with the social workers and the school counseling that the board has supported adding, the curriculum pieces and the health curriculum that the board has approved. So we do, you know, do a lot of those things, but it's a community, you know, issue, and I think we have to do it. And I agree with everybody who's pointed out, is having, you know, Joel or myself, you know, you see these numbers, it's
Horrifying.
it's horrifying. It really is.
And
Yes.
we're here to fight for the kids.
Right.
A lot of it.
Right.
You know, it's
Right.
about all the kids.
It would be great if we could get that in before graduation.
Yeah,
Yeah,
I agree.
well, yeah.
That's a tight schedule.
Well, thank you for raising it. It's an important issue. Thank you, Mary Ann. And
Well, it kind of went right along with what was going on.
Yeah. that was it was
Yeah.
a happy coincidence that it happened tonight. So, great. All right, so, I mean, I've got a potential motion to discuss adding demand zero to a future board agenda, but I don't know that we need to do that, because I think we've,
I guess maybe we can wait and,
yeah, so, all right, so let's.
Just give us a
skip that.
report at the next meeting, what's going on, where we are with it.
Yeah, that would be great.
yeah, I'll just report on it.
All right, so, action item number 9, I need a motion to adopt the K-12 world language units. So moved.
Second.
By Stephen, seconded by Diane. Thank you. All right, any discussion on those? Any discussion on this motion? Seeing none, all in favor, aye.
Aye.
All opposed, nay. Any abstentions? Passes 8-0. Thank you. Action item 10, I need a motion to rescind the following policies. 5100.9.6, maintenance and development of athletic programs. 5110.3.1, police in schools. 5142.4, school resource officer. 5120.9.5, automobile use and parking. 5140, school and community service, 5180.2, research, 9470, school attorney / legal services, and 9480, consultants to the board.
So
Second.
So by Diane, seconded by Maureen. Any discussion on rescinding those? Seeing none, all in favor, aye. All opposed, nay. Any abstentions? Motion carries 8-0. Thank you. Action item 11. I need a motion to approve the following policies: 50/50 student privacy, 95/30 executive sessions / open meetings, 9820.1 board member conferences, conventions and workshops, 9840 board member compensation and expenses.
so
By Diane, seconded by Maureen. Any discussion on approving those policies? Seeing none, all in favor, aye.
Aye.
All opposed, nay. Any abstentions? Motion carries 8-0. Thank you. Action item 12. I need a motion to approve the minutes of the March 5th, 2024 Board of Education meeting. Do I have a motion
so
by Emily?
second.
Seconded by Diane, thank you. Any discussion about the minutes from the March 5th meeting? No, okay, all in favor? Aye. All opposed, nay. I'm abstaining, I wasn't there, I don't have to abstain, but I didn't know what happened, so. So that's 701. Okay. All right, item number 13, any future agenda items, requests for future agenda items? Seeing none, meetings and dates of importance are attached in your packet. And I need a motion to adjourn.
So moved.
Again, seconded by Emily. That would be at 9:24 p.m. Any discussion on adjournment? All in favor, aye. Opposed, nay. Any abstentions? Okay, thank you.